Hello everyone, welcome. Today I'd like to take you through my 2024 election analysis and forecast for the US presidential election coming up next week. Just a little bit of background on myself. I've been a data scientist for nearly 17 years now. I work in the consumer goods and services space with many Fortune 500 companies and brands. My main expertise is in marketing analytics and consumer and shopper behavioral analytics. So that's just a little bit about me. And then also personally, I'll just point out that I am a Harris voter. I do lean left, and I've this election I've already voted. I voted blue up and down the ballot. Just wanted to put that out there, full transparency in terms of just who I am and what I'm about. But I'm trying to give as an objective analysis as I possibly can here. And so let's just jump right into it. Okay, so in my prediction here, in my forecast, I have Donald Trump winning. Okay, I have him winning the Electoral College substantially by 312 here to 226, and I have him sweeping all of the key swing states except for, as you can see, Nebraska's 2nd congressional district. I have Donald Trump winning the popular vote as well. You could see here all the way on the right, I have him winning it by just over half a point. 49.4%. This would essentially be the best performance by a Republican in the popular vote in over 20 years since George W. Bush. So I know, this may come as a shock to, I think, a lot of people. I think, the popular vote going for Trump. I think a lot of people might assume, like, if Trump wins it, a lot of scenarios that people have gamed out have him winning the Electoral College, but maybe losing the popular vote by 1 or 2 points. But in my forecast, I have him winning the popular vote by 0.6. And in the next few pages here, I'm going to walk you through why. Okay, reason number one why this is going to happen, okay? And I've tried to collect what I believe are the unbiased polls in my opinion and in my assessment. But essentially, reason number one, there's an over 5.5% difference in the national polling margin towards Donald Trump, in Donald Trump's favor in 2024 versus 2020, okay? What this means is the 2020 polls here on the right, they had Biden up versus Trump by a margin of 6.8% in the polls that I trust, or in the polls that at least I'm using in this analysis to demonstrate, okay? And Biden ended up winning that election by 4.5%. So you can see I have that up here, okay? 51.3% to 46.3%, okay? However, when we turn to the 2024 polls, this is the latest polls that we have coming in through late October, okay? Harris is only up an average of 1.2%. Okay, so that, in other words, that's a significant shift away from the Democratic candidate and towards the Republican of over 5.5%. Looking just at the polls 2020 to 2024. Okay. Reason number two, Harris is polling 3% below Biden versus the 2020 polling of Biden, and 2.5% below Biden's actual percentage of the 2020 vote. And meanwhile, Trump is actually polling the best he ever has. Whether you want to look at 2020, which I have here, his performance in the polls exceeds that of the 2020 actual results, and it exceeds his performance in the 2016 polls as well. So what we're seeing here on the right is I've just plotted the polling 2024 versus 2020 in the national polls that I trust, or that I'm using in this analysis. And they show that 3% shift. It's actually a little bit more than 3%, but Harris losing 3% support in those polls versus where Biden was at this same point leading into the election, a week before the election, or just days before the election. And that compares over here to Trump, who's polling 2.5 points higher where he was back in 2020. And then if you want to just disregard the 2020 polls and just look at the actual results, Harris is polling 2.6% lower than Biden performed, I should say, in 2020. And compared to Trump, who was polling 0.7% better compared to his actual percent of the national popular vote in 2020. So overall, I mean, I just think, like, if you're vying for Harris. I think this is all just bad news, right? This is not what you want to see, not what you want to hear. Obviously, going into an election versus if you're Trump, I think these are positive numbers. These have trended in the right direction. I think both versus the 2020 polls and the actual results. And you got to be feeling pretty good now, I would say. Reason number 3, the substantial shifts away from the Democratic candidate and towards Trump that we saw at the national level on the prior page, they're also evident at the swing state level as well, excluding Nebraska, number 2 here. And so, what I have here is I have the 2020 actual vote. I have the 2020 polls. This is for Biden. And then 2024, where it's looking at Harris versus Trump. And the margin of victory, for at least, or the margin, I should say, difference for the Democratic candidate versus Trump. And so, just first of all, overall, the 2020 polls just really overestimated Biden's support or, potential margin of victory over Trump. Especially in the Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania cases here, over forecasts of nearly 7, 5%, et cetera, as you could see in Wisconsin and Michigan, and a little bit in Pennsylvania, and a little bit in Nevada as well, especially in North Carolina too. Okay, but what we're seeing here is just look at the difference between the 2020 polling and the 2024 polls, and we just see such a substantial shift away from the Democratic candidate and towards Trump. In some of these cases, it's 8 points. It's 7 points, 5. Even I think in states like Georgia and Arizona, I think these 3-point shifts are very important and very substantial. Nevada, we see a 5-point shift. And so just overall, not what you want to see if you are a Harris supporter or Harris voter. And this is a positive for Trump if you're a Trump supporter, Trump voter. Reason number 4, and this is going to help Trump win the popular vote here, so I just want to really call that out. The shifts away from the Democratic candidate are happening broadly across other states as well, aside from the key swing states. Okay, and we see this is evident in New York, where we see the 2020 polling and the actual result. Biden won by 27. He was polling at plus 29, but 2024 Harris is only coming in plus 17. Okay, California, okay, very small difference here, but 4 points can be big if this holds up. New Jersey, 7-point difference. You've gone from a 20-point margin to 13. And also, I like looking at Texas and Florida as well. I think there's been a lot of commentary out there. Some people think these states are in play. A lot of Democrats, a lot of friends I have on the left think that these might be tight. I don't think they're going to be tight at all. I think it's going to be an easy win for Trump in those states. By the disclaimer, go out and vote regardless. Whether you're on the left or right. It's a sacred right, and just take all this analysis with a grain of salt. Don't let it dissuade you from voting. Vote anyway. But that being said, I just think Texas and Florida are not in play. You could see the shifts here as well. Biden had been polling pretty tight with Trump in 2020, and in Florida he was actually leading by 2, but the actual results turned out differently. And then Harris is just polling, much worse in both of these cases, Texas and Florida. So, but the larger point is this is demonstrative or illustrative of the shift away from the Democratic candidate in 2020 and towards Trump in 2024. Okay, reason number 5 is Harris peaked at about 4.5% in early September, again, using the national polling that I do trust or that I'm using in this analysis, and she struggled to maintain that. She's lost momentum since, and Trump has gained the momentum. I think it's a pretty clear trend line that you can go to 538, you can go to Real Clear Politics and others who kind of do the trend line, and you could see that if you want to look at it here from point A to point B, just early September, you have the margins in all the polls that I've included here, and it's gone from an average of 4.5% to now it's only 1.2%. So very narrow lead. I mean, that's effectively tied, to the point where there's no, I get it, there's no comfort for either candidate, but the trend is in the wrong direction for Harris and is in the right direction for Trump. Okay, those are my reasons for the forecast that I have. But I just want to go through a few myths and narrative about the election and some commentary that I've heard, and just respond to it. Provide a counterpoint to the points that have been made. Okay, number one, a lot of people are saying Republicans have been flooding the zone with bad polling. I guess the idea is, that it's to kind of make results look more favorable, or the momentum more favorable to Trump. But my response to that is, even in the unbiased and left-leaning polls, a couple of which I've showed earlier, I think they show, again, Trump polling the best he ever has, and B, the shift away from the Democratic candidate to Trump, both in 2020 and in early September 2024, compared to just under 2 months ago. Number two, this myth that polling only captures people with landlines. This is false. I think that there may be a few exceptions to this that are remaining, but for the vast majority now of pollsters, their methodology includes a variety of ways to gather sample outside of landlines. You can go to their sites, or pages, etc., to reach out and or just review their methodologies. I'm not going to go through here, but it's not landline. It's not strictly landline. They use a variety of methods to gather sample. Polls in 2022 predicted a red wave, but that did not happen. This is one I hear all the time from people on the left, and what I'll say to that is, I think it's inaccurate. It's almost a red herring, I think, because I think a lot of pundits predicted a red wave, right? They predicted a lot of House seats being lost, but I think if you look at the polls in 2022, they were fairly accurate. When you look at the national generic congressional ballot, it had Republicans winning 2.5%, and then when you look at the actual House vote in 2022, Republicans ended up winning by an aggregate of 2.7% nationally. When you add up all those House races, they won 50% to 47.3%. So, again, just wanted to dispel some myths and some points here. All right, and how did I arrive at the 48.8% for Harris and 49.4% for Trump? It's all about turnout. Okay, turnout determines elections, essentially. Predicting the turnout is really tough. The composition of voters, it's really tough. But one of the trends I've seen, and the reason I give a slight edge in the composition of voters to Republicans here, is a voter registration drive that I think has outperformed Democrats recently. And for that reason, I'm giving Republicans the slight edge in turnout, a 1-point edge compared to 2020. This is the exit polls and the actuals, compared to 2020, where Democrats had a slight edge. That's point number one. Point number two is the independents. In 2020, they swung plus 13 heavily to Biden. Okay, that was a decisive reason, one of the reasons for his victory. Now in 2024, when I've looked at the crosstabs of independents, I don't see the same gap. I don't see the same advantage for the Democratic candidate. Some polls in some weeks and also the most recent ones, you'll see like +5 for Harris, or maybe +2 for Trump, or +2 for Harris. It's a very narrow range. It's kind of bouncing back and forth. And for that reason, when I see that, it's bouncing back and forth among independents who, they might, change their mood, often, or they might be unclear, or just they might be not as firm on one candidate or the other for whatever reason. But when I see it bouncing back and forth like that, what it tells me is this is probably going to draw about even between the candidates, maybe, +2 or +3 for one or the other, but ultimately that's not enough to make a difference electorally, at least for what I'm showing here. And just overall, for those reasons, I still have, I think you had kind of in 2020, you had 6% of Republicans go for Biden and only 5% of Democrats go for Trump. So you have a little bit, maybe that's kind of like the never Trump vote, the never Trump margin. And so I've kind of continued that here. You have a little bit of a +1 here, 5.5% versus 4.5% Republicans going for Harris in this case in 2024. But overall, I just don't see that number also being too big. I don't see this number here being as big as a lot of people on the left, would want it to be or would hope it would be. But I do give a slight advantage there. Okay, that being said, that's everything I wanted to show everyone today. Thanks for your time.